Global payroll today has gone through an evolution of going from early majority to becoming much more mainstream. And by global payroll, I mean the ability to have one service provider or a couple of service providers globally managing those services and making that data available. What I've seen over the last 8 years is companies who started this process much earlier than companies who are now doing it have got a much more better understanding of their organization. One company I worked with a number of years ago were a very early company to go and deploy global payroll in a lot of countries, and a lot meaning 30 plus countries around the world. They initially had no availability of data and the ability to consolidate that. They put all of their payroll processes into a shared service environment, and because they're managing that through one HR and one payroll system, they get a lot more availability of that information. So the early adopters, who are now probably in their second buying cycle, have a lot better understanding of their organization. They know what their payroll processes look like, they know what their compliance needs and status looks like in different countries, and they have an awful lot more data than they ever had previously. One of the things I heard recently that really rung true is we can't manage what we can't measure. And this is something that company does very, very well, because they can measure performance of payroll. They can measure one country costs against another country cost. And this is something that the early adopters will have seen this benefit from, and they will be continuing to enhance and hone in on what that data and what it means to them actually is. Now what we're seeing is becoming more of a majority, so there's conversations, is global payroll still a myth? It's not a myth. A number of people in the market have been doing this for a long, long time in various different ways. And I think, to me, how that expands going forwards is just more companies saying, I'm now ready. I've seen that the market is proven. I can see that there's availability of services. I have a much better idea about what I want to do. And we will see a lot more companies over the next few years where this becomes very much a mainstream process of, rather than having 50 payroll systems or vendors in 50 countries, we have one or potentially two globally that are managing everything for us, and that's where it becomes a real mainstream method of doing, an accepted method of doing payroll internationally. Why should companies do something rather than watch and see what happens? It's a very good question. It's actually a fairly simple answer. That the sooner you do something about your global payroll to get more competitive and more knowledge as a business, the sooner you get value from that information. So whilst if payroll's working great and you feel you have no need to be able to report on that information, fantastic. Maybe you can sit on the sidelines and watch what happens in the market. But what I see is a market that's now developed to a number of different providers. We've got some very, very large entrants to the market, because the barrier to entry to global payroll is quite high. It's not an easy thing to do well. And seeing a lot more of the very large companies around the world in perhaps what might be seen as IT organizations starting to get more interested in global payroll. What I see from a customer landscape is people starting to put more focus on global payroll, and that might be coming from a need to reinvest in our HR applications, because a lot more people are saying, hey, why am I maintaining these huge instances of ERP solutions when I can go and now buy a SaaS product that's very mature, very functionally rich, that I couldn't buy 5 years ago, for example. So that naturally becomes a catalyst for change in payroll. But what I see is people who don't do that now have to wait longer for the benefit. It's just like anything. If you implement a business initiative where you're hoping to either drive down costs or hoping to get more competitive because of that availability of data, the sooner you do something about it, the more likely you are to get a benefit more quickly. Don't do something because perhaps you're more risk averse, and that's an absolutely fine way to look at things. All that means is that you won't be as competitive in payroll and HR type support as anybody else in your market. And when we look at the fact that every company's biggest cost is its people, the ability to start understanding that information and make useful decisions with it is really what you miss out on by waiting and seeing what happens. So over the next few years in our market, do I see a lot of change happening? I think the technology will continue to evolve. You've got a number of companies on their second buying cycle, so that will start to drive down to an extent cost points. It will start to drive up what people want as a service because they're now more educated than they may have been previously. But the companies who sit and say, I'm happy with what we have and I don't want to do anything, those companies will just miss out because they won't be really harnessing and doing the very best job they could be of understanding their costs and understanding how to shape their organisation for the future. So those are the things that are important for me about why you should do something versus doing nothing.